My name is Seemantini Pathak, and I am a professor at the Ivey Business School. And I work in the strategy area group. And in the last 3 years, I have been exposed to the character framework, got very interested in it, began working on it, done a couple of courses myself, and also taught students the character framework. So I initially got interested in character as a researcher. I study strategic leadership. And so I study CEOs, board members, founders, executive team members, and other leaders of organizations. And I have done so for several years. And we find that a lot of what leaders do is attributed to things like their experiences or the environment that they are in, the context that they are in. And one thing that as soon as I saw the character framework, I realized was missing is this idea that even if you're in a particular environment, even if your experiences push you in a particular direction, you still have agency to go one way or the other. And I saw the character framework as a way of perhaps explaining some of that agency and perhaps saying, okay, what makes somebody take one path and somebody take another path, right? So that is how I initially got interested in it as a researcher. And then once I came to Ivey, I joined the Leader Character Practitioner Certification Program. And of course, I always thought it is something that is really good for each of us to work on. But joining that program helped me understand some of these dimensions in more detail and in my own context, right? And now that we are doing the construct thing, I'm like, okay, it's an onion, right? There are so many layers to peel, and there are so many new ways of looking at it. And so it is like a practice. And I think it's a good way to make sense of how we ourselves navigate the world, right? So it's not just how strategic leaders navigate their world, it's how do we navigate our world, and how can we navigate it better? I have a tendency to take on too much, and so I end up being overwhelmed pretty often. And I work very hard. I work consistently hard, but I'm not quite as consistent in getting things back when I say I'm going to get them back. And so because of that, I've always felt like, gosh, my integrity isn't really great, and I used to be like, how do I get out of this situation? And I'm still like, how do I get out of this situation, right? Because I don't like being in a place where I told somebody I'll get them something back at this stage, and then I simply cannot. It's just not possible, right? And so then I have to go back to them and say, okay, I couldn't because I was working on this other thing, or this happened, or I was working so hard, I got burned out and exhausted and I couldn't work on it, right? And so on. And not everybody is super patient, and not everybody deals with it with compassion, right? And so it's been something really hard for me. And so first in integrity, I started with the whole consistency thing, right? And I put up like a sticky note on my laptop saying, how do I keep my word? And I started to get insights like, okay, I should think about how much time do I have in the next week, or okay, this is really tempting, or I feel really responsible for this, because as a tenured faculty member, when we have a lot of junior faculty, I feel like I need to take on tasks. And also I see, some of my colleagues, I see them being overwhelmed, and I'm like, okay, I need to help out. And so I have a really high sense of responsibility that way. And so it started to make me reflect on what is happening? Like, okay, I have this sense of responsibility, but what happens if I say no? And if I say no, I feel like I'm letting people down. But I realized I'm also letting people down if I'm unable to deliver. And so from consistent, I went to wait, am I being authentic? And I've always thought of myself as a very authentic person because I think of myself as not two-faced, right? Like I rarely filter if I'm talking to people and things like that, right? But the insight I got is, am I being authentic enough with myself? Am I understanding what my limitations are, what my health allows me to do, what my other responsibilities allow me to do, and am I being authentic enough with myself? And I thought that felt like an epiphany. And so I was, so change doesn't happen quickly. It's very easy to say you need to do this or I need to do this, but change doesn't happen quickly. And so now what I'm working on with the whole authentic thing is I have this daily planner, and I'm almost writing down what my thoughts are whenever I am at a decision point. And many of these decision points, they don't necessarily feel like decision points. They feel like this is something, of course, I have to do it, right? It's part of my job. And so even having to say to myself, wait, is this part of my job? Is this part of my job at this moment, right? Or if I take this on, what am I compromising? And I have a feeling that it is going to take me a long time to get there, but I have a feeling that this is the right way to go. And to say, what is actually going on here? What is the mechanism inside our brain that is making us go one way? And so then if we need to change it, we need to understand it. And so the other thing that I realized was that I kept thinking that I have vices of deficiency in integrity. But I realized that, with some of the elements, it almost operates like a vice of excess that then goes into a vice of, deficiency in other areas. And there was one question where it said, point to a time when you should have been balanced, but you exhibited the deficient vice or the excess vice, and the excess vice was uncompromising. And I think of myself as somebody that is empathetic, right? Somebody that really tries to understand the other person's point of view. So I'm uncompromising, me never. But then I suddenly remembered this time where my child wanted something, and I just went back to this automatic parenting script like, no, you must do this and you must do it this way because that's the right way to do. And I did not take the effort to think about, why does my child want this? And what's going on with them, right? And it just hit me like a bolt of lightning, and it caused me so much pain that I did this to my own child. So I think just meditating on the question, it has brought forth surprising things. I really like the fact that we meet once a month. And in the beginning, it felt like a task because I was already busy with a whole lot of other things, and these weren't people that I knew. And I still don't know them well. But the fact that the meeting was there month after month after month, and I couldn't make a few of those, and whether I could make it or not, the meeting was there, and it reminded me that, yes, there's a place to go to. And then at some point, I began to look at the online discussions, and I saw that people were posting some pretty interesting questions there, right? And so in the meetings, I really like that we get to split up into small groups and come up with insights. And I feel like that is when some of the more surprising insights come in. And hearing how people react to a particular element, not even a dimension, even to a particular element, what they think of as a vice of excess, what they think of as a vice of deficiency, that can be really insightful. And as I said before, I also get surprised by what is coming out of my own mouth, because again, my brain has been processing this, but when we are in that environment with supportive people who know what we've been reflecting on, who've been reflecting on the same thing, that is really powerful. And sometimes what your brain throws up then is how it has made sense of these things, and it surprises you yourself, right? So I think that is really cool. I find our exercises a lot of fun. We do exercises every single time, and the integrity exercise in particular was really fun and somewhat surprising, and impactful in ways that I could not have foreseen before. So I very much enjoy those as well. And I also enjoy the reminder sometimes, because I may not have focused on a particular element of a dimension in so much detail myself, but I really enjoy hearing what people have thought about it and what they've reflected and concluded. And I really like your reminders, Corey, about, like, pay attention to this and remember it doesn't have to be that way. And so drawing our attention again to things that we may not have thought of. Part of my job is to help make engineering students into better leaders. And this summer, I taught leadership to engineering students, and the character framework was a huge chunk of that class. So we spent about 60% of the class focused on that. And we spent the rest of the class looking at leadership issues that come up for engineering leaders and how they can deal with it. And in each of those scenarios, cases, we had guest lecturers come in and so on. In each of those, the students also thought about, okay, what character dimensions are relevant here in terms of vices of deficiency or excess, or in terms of what else needs to be strengthened for that situation. So that was really eye-opening, because I saw that a lot of my students were surprised that they were expected to speak up in class. And in fact, some of the comments I got said, I thought this would be a typical engineering class where the professor lectures and we take notes. And in fact, I had a number of students quit after the first week because they simply could not take this idea of having to speak up in class. But we eventually ended up with 28 students, and and I suppose they were the ones who self-selected and said, okay, like, I'm willing to do this. And for them, it was frightening in many ways. Many of them were international students, but it was also empowering. So I got an idea of the kinds of individuals that I will be looking at. And so with my engineering colleagues, I am working on putting in place projects where we ask students across the different years of the engineering program what leadership traits do they think that they are lacking, right? And how might character help with them? And then separately, we are putting in place with Lucas Monzani, we are putting in place a program where engineering students can come for 8 weeks and learn about character. And then we plan to look at a few different outcomes and see how that impacts them. So look at a control group and look at an experimental group. There's also ideas about AI is really big now. And so how would character impact, right, what we need in AI? And so there's this thought about also talking to a lot of leaders about what do we need for students who are going to be working on AI as developers, as managers, right? Like, what do they need to keep in mind? So as we have these new disruptive technologies come up that have the potential to change the world a lot, it really makes sense to get character in there and say, let us make sure that these are people that are going to be able to do things in the right way, or at least to ask the right questions. In general, I think that Gen Z and the folks after them, they are going to face a really difficult future with all the planetary challenges that we have, the kind of polarization and so on. I mean, climate refugees, there's an estimate that there could be up to 100 million climate refugees by 2050. And so on. So this is going to be a generation that has a really difficult task. And I see the character work as helping to inform them and helping to prepare them in order to take on these challenges of the future. So I think it has the potential to be really transformational and really important. And I will be happy if I can play a small part in getting that out there. It is easy for us to get into routines. It is easy for us to get into habits of thoughts. For example, thinking that, okay, students always will try to take the easier path, right? And so these are some of the scripts that professors can have, thinking, or like there's a mug that says it's on the syllabus, right? So like this idea that, okay, students will not bother to look at stuff, they need to take on more responsibility and so on and so forth. So like, and of course there are other scripts as well. In terms of research, the script is publish or perish, etc. But what character does, I think, is shake you out of your habitual habits of being and make you question, what am I doing? And does it make sense for this point? So when it comes to scripts about students, I think it allows us to see them as human beings. And even when they're not exhibiting perfect behavior, it allows us to see them as, young people that might have a lot going on, that might have scary things happening in their lives or in their future and so on, and to be a little more compassionate with them. And sometimes I think, especially when we, of course all of us have scripts, but when we have a lot of scripts that we aren't aware of, it's easier to be compassionate with others than with ourselves. And so as we start being compassionate with others, I think even for ourselves, and so for academia, or I suppose many other professions, there's a lot of ways to do academia. Publish or perish is not the only way to do academia, right? But even this idea of what are possibilities isn't possible to look at when we are caught up in the scripts. And so just this idea of meditating on a dimension or meditating on an element, or like having people ask questions that challenge us, I believe that it helps us to be more intentional in our lives and to shape our lives ourselves, right? Rather than having them shaped for us. And that is powerful.